So moving on to Bi Plus Lives, our second panel on Bi Plus Lives today. And another caveat or content warning at the start of this one that we are again touching on some potentially sensitive topics that could kind of affect people emotionally. So if you need to step away or take a break, please do so and just be aware that we are talking about these sensitive topics in this session. The first presentation is from Chelsie Holmes, she, they. Chelsie is a bisexual and genderqueer activist with 10 years of experience working with survivors of intimate partner and sexual violence, and is the founder and program director of Queer Futures, which is an LGBTQIA2S+ resource center in rural Colorado. They co-facilitate a support group for LGBTQIA2+ survivors of intimate partner violence with a local advocacy support group called Rest and Resistance, which combines healing and community action and has served as a model for other organisations. So over to you, Chelsie, to talk about intimate partner violence and bisexual plus women.
Hello, thank you so much for having me today. So I am a bisexual woman who was in an abusive relationship for 7 years. And even as a professional advocate for survivors of intimate partner violence with extensive training, I did not recognize that my relationship was abusive. And I was actually still in that relationship while working in the field of advocacy. So prior to founding Queer Futures, I was in direct services with survivors of intimate partner violence, sexual assault, and sex trafficking. And today I'm often asked to train advocacy and public health institutions across Colorado on best practices for serving LGBTQ survivors, including presentations specifically about bisexuality and intimate partner violence. So I'm speaking from a very service provider perspective today, but I'm also going to name how gaps in research are affecting the quality of the support that bisexual people are receiving and how these gaps allow this violence to continue unchecked. Across the dozens of trainings that I attended about LGBTQ survivors throughout my career, I did not see my experience reflected. Most of the trainings share the statistics, which show that well over half of bisexual women in the United States experience intimate partner violence in their lifetime, which is far higher than straight women and other sexual minorities. But then the conversation typically shifts immediately to abuse in same-sex relationships. And that certainly is important to talk about, but the vast majority of LGBTQ survivors are bisexual women who are abused by men. And they do have unique experiences and needs that merit attention. So I'll also share that the statistics that I just talked about are outdated. The Center for Disease Control in the United States was scheduled to facilitate another comprehensive study on intimate partner violence this year, but we're assuming that's not happening because studies of this kind are being defunded by the current administration in power. So I'm working with the LGBTQ Institute on Intimate Partner Violence, which is a program of the Los Angeles LGBT Resource Center, to facilitate our own nationwide survey and get some reliable updated data. But before founding Queer Futures, I was the director of a community-based program serving survivors. And the first thing I did when I stepped into leadership was pull demographic numbers to see if we were equitably serving marginalized populations. And the data said that we had never served a single bisexual person. And this is obviously impossible. What we were doing was making assumptions. So we were marking clients as LGBTQ only if they presented in a same-sex relationship or were openly transgender. So I changed our intake forms and added an optional question for self-disclosure of sexual orientation, which is not an industry standard across advocacy organizations. In fact, I've gotten a lot of pushback when I've called for other organizations to do the same. And the results were shocking. At one point, we learned that every single person in our emergency shelter identified as bisexual or pansexual, and all of them were women who were abused by men. This matters because when we don't ask, we erase people. and survivors get screened out of culturally specific services that could benefit them, and we miss these critical trends that demand inquiry. I believe that part of why I didn't recognize my own abuse is that my relationship was not conventional. It was an informal, non monogamous, no labels relationship, but it spanned 7 years. So it wasn't unserious or insignificant, it was just not traditional. And this wasn't like a negotiated polyamory situation with clear agreements. My partner was straight and disconnected from queer and polyamorous culture, and he exploited the lack of definition. The traditional power and control wheel, which is the most common tool that advocates use to describe abusive relationships, is designed for monogamous couples with shared housing or finances or kids. And there's an LGBTQ version of that power and control wheel, but it's nearly identical. It just has examples such as threatening to out your partner as an abuse tactic. But bisexual people, especially women, often live in these sustained, undefined dating relationships. And sometimes that's imposed on us by stereotypes. Other times it's liberating and it's a refusal to accept cultural norms around relationships. Um, but these dynamics of informal, non monogamous relationships create an environment for unique and understudied tactics of coercive control that don't fit into the frameworks we've been provided. So, for example, when there are no cultural scripts to rely on, boundaries are harder to define and therefore harder to defend. Abusive partners can dangle commitment as leverage for control. The message is, I might make it official if you submit. They can minimize the relationship as just hooking up to avoid accountability and discredit survivors. The survivor can be framed as scorned or rejected rather than abused or traumatized. And then stereotypes specifically about bisexual women being hypersexual or down for anything or kinky are weaponized to excuse boundary violations and even explain away bruises and other physical evidence of abuse. So these aren't minor issues. These are patterns of coercive control that I have lived, and I hear them echoed constantly in bisexual affirming survivor groups and social spaces. And we're missing a whole category of coercive control that uniquely targets bisexual women. But here's the problem: there are not yet evidence-based approaches available for addressing this. We have the statistics, but we don't have the research to explain these disparities, and therefore no interventions can be built from them. We need rigorous survivor-centered research on intimate partner violence in bisexual relationships, not as a statistic that we present briefly and then brush over, but as a priority issue. And minimizing this is not neutral. It's systemic oppression at the intersection of sexism and biphobia. And we're talking about pervasive and sometimes deadly violence. And it doesn't necessarily look like slurs on the street and hate crimes, but it's playing out behind closed doors, and it's an invisible problem that's impacting a population that is too often erased and deprioritized. So I am currently in the process of applying to PhD programs in hopes of studying this further. But my call to action for the bisexual movement as a collective would be that we prioritize and champion intimate partner violence as our issue, or we'll continue to lose lives in the cracks between the LGBTQ movement and the intimate partner violence advocacy field. No one else is championing this, and so we need to mobilize ourselves around this. Thank you so much for having me. Let me know if you have questions. I can put my email in the chat.
Thank you so much, Chelsea. It's such an important topic, and as you say, something that isn't spoken enough about. And I think it's truly shocking that those assumptions were being made, as they are in many other spheres. They're made in healthcare, they're made in so many different aspects of life where people are just assumed to be heterosexual or assumed to be gay because of their relationships, and we're just kind of erased in those ways with intake forms not considering us. So I think it's brilliant that that's changed and that that's something that's asked about, and yeah, really important work. If anyone has questions for Chelsie, we'll have hopefully some time at the end of this session, but please feel free to put questions in the chat at any point and continue this discussion. I'd like to move on to our second presentation for this panel, which is Understanding the Bisexual Mental Health Crisis. So I'd like to introduce Dave Fox, he, him. Dave is an author and speaker who recently completed a master's degree in clinical mental health counseling from Palo Alto University in California. He made bisexual mental health a focal point of his studies and is working to improve bi-plus awareness within the therapy profession, so very important stuff. He also specializes in working with clients who are living outside of their countries and cultures of origin. Originally from the United States, he has lived in Southeast Asia since 2011 and is currently based in Ho Chi Minh in Vietnam, where he works as a therapist for the local expat community. Over to you, Dave.
Thanks, Ellen. It's exciting for me to be here. I first attended this conference 3 years ago, just as I was starting my master's degree studies, and it's nice to be here 3 years later as a presenter with a sparkly new master's degree, which I finished a few months ago. And as you were saying, while I was studying, I did a lot of research into bisexual mental health. And the presentation that I'm going to offer today is it's actually an adaptation. It was a much longer presentation for students in my program and professors, so people who are either in the mental health industry or were training to be. I'm going to kind of flip the script a little bit for our crowd and talk about some issues with mental health in the bisexual community, and some things that I think we can do to improve the situation. Let me see if screen sharing will work here. Technology has there we go. Y'all see my screen here, I think. Excellent. I'm going to dive right into this. This was originally a 45-minute talk, and I've tried to cut it down to around 10 minutes. So apologies in advance if I'm sort of glossing over some things. Please feel free to email me if you have any questions, if there's anything I don't have time to cover in depth. But I want to start out by just addressing the title of my presentation, Understanding the Bisexual Mental Health Crisis, because I know crisis is a strong word, and I want to explain why I am using that particular word. There was a study that was published a couple of years ago in the American Journal of Psychiatry, and I've seen some other studies with very similar statistics. This particular one was looking at depression and suicide-related behaviors among people of different sexual identities. And they used heterosexual people as kind of the baseline. And what they found was that in the, come on, computer. There we go. In the gay and lesbian community, depression and suicidality rates were about a little more than double what they were compared to the heterosexual population. In the bisexual population, that number was nearly triple. And so that higher number in general across the board in the LGBTQ population, I think we all know, can be attributed to minority stress. But I started wondering, well, why is that number so much higher among bi-plus people compared to monosexual queer people? And there are a few different things going on, and I'm going to try to not be redundant with other stuff that we already know or that has been said in other presentations. But validation, we talk a lot about bisexual erasure, and we talk about it sometimes as a broad thing, but in terms of an individual's sense of self and sense of validity, it can have a really strong impact. Visibility, a lack of role models, lack of representation and sometimes misrepresentation in popular culture, and also a real severe lack of awareness within the mental health profession in general. I'll talk more about that in a couple of minutes. Myths and microaggressions. This was a huge part of my broader presentation. I know most of us know a lot of these already, so I'm just going to quick touch on a couple of the big ones. when somebody comes out as bi, oh, it's just a phase, you'll grow out of it. I think this is something that gets told a lot, particularly to younger people when they're first coming out as bi. I'm also inclined to believe that women hear this more than men. Young women hear this more than young men. And it's this very sort of paternalistic, oh yeah, you're just experimenting a little bit, but then you're going to go find yourself a good man and be a good wife. So that sort of a statement is very invalidating. And then the flip side of the coin, which I've heard too many times to count, oh, you're really gay, you just haven't accepted it yet. I hear this from gay men. I've heard it from several straight women over the years. My response to gay men when they say this to me is, how do you feel when a straight person says it's unnatural to be gay? Because you're doing the exact same thing to me right now. You're basing your judgment of me on your experience, and you're telling me that who I am, who I say I am, is not valid and is not real based on your experience. Um, there was another survey done by the Pew Research Center a few years ago that asked queer people, are you out to all or most of the important people in your life? 75% of gay and lesbian respondents said yes. Only 19% of bisexual respondents answered yes to that. And, we're often accused of so-called straight passing privilege and the idea that, let's say I, as a cisgendered man, if I want, I can only date women. And then I don't ever have to come out and I've got it really easy. I think state passing privilege is a horrible term to use. It's not a privilege. Yes, people do this. And what we don't think about is the consequences of living with a secret about yourself, something that feels maybe very strong inside of you, and that you feel you can't talk about, and you don't have anybody to talk about. And a lot of people end up just not seeking out a community or a support network because they're trying to just go along with this kind of thing. So yes, so-called, well, straight passing happens. I think we need to stop using the word privilege when we define it. Another challenge that bi plus people face is if you want to get into a monogamous relationship with a monosexual partner, whether it is a mixed sex or a same-sex relationship, how do you tell them? When do you tell them? And this is a huge source of stress for a lot of bisexual people in terms of, do I tell this person who I like that I'm bi, or are they going to reject me if I do? Something I've learned over the years personally is I let people know right away, because if you tell someone 3 months down the road or a year or two into a relationship, then they're going to feel blindsided, and they're going to feel like you've been keeping a secret, which I guess you have. I want to be really clear. I'm not saying that everybody needs to be 100% out all the time. I believe that the choice to be out and to whom you are out to is a very personal decision. I know there are there's one wing of queer politics that says everybody needs to be out. I think that really invalidates other mental health challenges people might have, other safety challenges, and things like that. But I do think, whether anybody here or if you know people who are struggling with this, advice I always give people, let somebody know right away. Know that they might have questions, they might have hesitations, they might have suspicions. And so be prepared to have a discussion with them about this. Understand your own feelings about what you're going to say, about who you are inside, and how you feel you are going to be able to navigate a monogamous relationship. And so bisexual erasure, as I was saying, has also spilled into the mental health industry. One question I asked, and again, this was originally a presentation for counseling students, and I asked them, how many assigned readings, et cetera, have you encountered in your studies at our university that address the unique mental health needs and societal challenges that bisexual and bi plus people face? Every single person in 2 different situations where I gave this talk answered 0. They had not encountered a single reading or video or any kind of an assignment, other than in my university had a sexual issues and counseling class that did touch on this a little bit. But this is not meant to be an indictment of my university. This is what I'm seeing across the board in academia, in trainings for mental health professionals. There's just simply not enough information out there about the issues that bi plus people face. We very often are lumped in there as LGBTQ. And I think that a lot of therapist trainees who are not bi tend to think that bi people go through the exact same sort of sense of development, personal development, and the same kinds of issues that gay and lesbian people face. So people go in for counseling and they can encounter all kinds of things from their therapists. Microaggressions, which we've touched on a little bit. I put also macroaggressions here. I'll tell you a pretty horrifying personal story. In 2008, when I was living in Seattle, I went to see a therapist, and it was in my second session that I told him that I was bi. This was somebody who listed sexuality or sexual concerns on his website as one of his specialties. What he told me in response to that was, he said, look, being heterosexual is completely normal and natural. Being homosexual is completely normal and natural. And then he said, and these were his exact words, I will never forget them. He said, bisexuality is as abnormal as bestiality. He was telling me that my ability to be attracted to more than one gender was the same as if I wanted to go have sex with a dog or a kangaroo, or a walrus or something like that. I asked him where he was coming up with that, and he told me, well, there had been this study in which people were shown various images of men and women, and they were kind of sexually charged images, and they had wires attached to various parts of their body to test their reactions. And everybody in the study responded to either the images of men or the images of women, or the images of heterosexual couples, or the images, or I should say mixed sex couples, the images of same-sex couples. This study did actually happen. I looked it up, and it was then followed by many other studies that basically invalidated it. In fact, recently I've tried to find it, and I can't even find it out there anymore. It's been kind of like the study has been erased. If anybody knows what I'm talking about and knows where I could see it, I would love to hear from you. But anyway, other things that can happen in therapy, as I mentioned, just conflating the experiences of bi plus people as the same as experiences of gay and lesbian people, and also what I call guilt by association assumptions. This is something that Chelsie touched on briefly in her presentation, and this isn't only in the therapy office. This is out in the world in general. But therapists very often, when a client starts talking about their partner, they will assume that the client is either straight or gay, depending on the gender of the partner. I always encourage people, if you are bi or a bi plus identity and you start to talk about a partner, also let your therapist know right away that you're bi, even if you're not there to talk about your sexual identity. Sometimes bi people go to therapy and they don't need to talk about being bi in therapy, but I think it's good, not only because we're advocating for ourselves and our therapist's understanding of ourselves, but it is also advocating for the bi community in general to just gently let mental health professionals know, hey, don't make assumptions on this monosexual sort of paradigm in which we live. And so finally, just to wrap things up, what can we do as members of the bi plus community? Talking about these situations with people in the mental health profession, and that might not necessarily be our own therapists, but if we've got friends, if we've got bi friends who are in therapy, encouraging them to have these conversations, or if we just happen to be friends with people who work in mental health, I'm talking to them and saying, hey, could we have a little chat sometime about this? Because it's a very serious issue, and opening up that conversation with that same statistic I offered at the beginning of my presentation, the fact that that depression and suicidality rates are so much higher in the bi community compared to the monosexual gay and lesbian community. I think it's a good way to start this discussion. Also, as bi plus people, being aware that we do experience minority stress. I think that I didn't understand that when I was younger. I was one of these people who, for a long time, I was only dating women, and I was going through the sort of the straight passing thing in a lot of ways. I didn't realize how much minority stress was actually affecting my own sense of self, my own identity. And also, and this is so important, seeking out bi-friendly communities, finding people who you can connect with, who are having similar experiences to you. There is a lot of strength and support that can come from situations like that. I know I've raced through a lot of this quickly. I wanted to be mindful of the time. But if any of you would like to get in touch with me, here is my email address, dave@globejotting.com with a J. And also, if any of you know of people working in the mental health field, I'm happy to talk to anybody about this. So please feel free to also pass my email address on to them. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much, Dave. It's such an important topic and one very close to my own heart as someone whose PhD looked at mental health, and also I also work within the minority stress framework. So it's great to hear other people talking about minority stress theory and how discrimination and different types of minority stress can impact our mental health as bisexual plus people. Again, if there are any questions, please put them in the chat or reach out to Dave via email, and I'll just introduce our next speaker. Keeping my fingers crossed that we will have time at the end of this session to actually have a group discussion about these topics. Our third presentation will be from Pamela Vallejos about the invisible binary and the epistemic resistance of bi plus narratives. Pamela is a Peruvian American researcher and activist whose work explores sexuality, gender, and I can't speak today, epistemology in Latin America. With an academic background in the social sciences, her research focuses on bisexual and pansexual experiences, examining how identities are narrated, negotiated, and made legible within heteronormative and monosexist contexts. Pamela is a Peruvian American researcher and activist whose work examines sexuality and gender, and she's currently pursuing a master's in gender studies. And over to you, Pamela, because I'm very aware of the time and don't want to take up time talking.
Thank you so much. Everything I've heard until now has been incredibly interesting, and I'm so grateful to be able to present in this space. I'm gonna put a timer on so I don't pass my time, but as Ellen said, I'm Pamela Vallejos Chavez. I'm Peruvian American, and I'm going to share a preliminary version of my master's thesis called The Invisible Binary and the Epistemic Resistance of Bi Plus Narratives. Before I start, I just want to give like a little context of what the Peruvian the Peruvian panorama is like in regards to bi plus rights. Basically, we are one of the last countries in the region that does not recognize any LGBTQI plus human rights. So we are very behind compared to other countries, compared to the global north. And this directly also impacts bi plus activism because it is completely disregarded by a lot of leadership within the LGBTI movement. There have been some movement in regards to bi plus activism, but it is like an uphill battle. And that is very relevant to why I am doing this study in my master's program and why I'm focusing so much on what I call the invisible binary. But little by little. First, I would like to start with this global study from Ipsos, which includes over 30 countries, including my country of Peru, where it had identified that 55% of the global LGBTI plus population identifies as bi plus. This includes bisexual and pansexual people. So this is one of like the main arguments I use to start talking about this, because in the context that I am in academia and in activism, again, bi plus discussions or agendas are not necessarily prioritized, and I position it by saying that we are literally the majority within the LGBTI community, and if you're not taking into account the majority, then you are definitely erasing some sort of problems that need to be addressed. I want to focus primarily on the theoretical framework because I have such a short time. Like Dave said, my presentation's also a lot longer, but I'm going to be as brief as possible. So, and I want to focus on the theoretical framework because it has been so challenging to talk about monosexism in academia. This is an activist term. I come from activism. So I went straight into my classes and into my thesis seminar being like, monosexism is what I want to study. And my professors looked at me like, what is that? And these are people who specialize in sexual diversity. So I have found it incredibly difficult as a bi plus researcher to create a strong theoretical argument as to why monosexism is important and relevant to sexuality studies. And I finally feel like I've gotten there, and that is part of what I want to share with you today. In activism, we define monosexism as a system, a normative system that imposes that the norm of one gender attraction. But while I was doing this research, I was questioning what the other side of this, what monosexual would understand would be like, okay, well, why is there a system that only restricts your attraction to one gender? Like, why is that oppressive to you? So throughout a lot of just like rumination and a lot of reading, I have been able to explain it the following way. First of all, I call it an invisible binary because in gender studies, we talk a lot about binary thinking. It's one of like the corner points of the gender system. It's a big part of colonial systems as well. And I see how we question this constantly within gender studies, but we are not questioning the binary that is still present in sexuality. So I have discussed monosexism in my work as a normative system that establishes heterosexuality and homosexuality as the only intelligible sexual identities, organizing sexual desire and practice into two hierarchical and exclusive categories. I use, here I'm citing Santos Craig 2024 because they've done an amazing paper that does an extensive review of the term monosexism, and also Yoshino, who wrote the epistemic contract of bi-erasure, which is a foundational paper for this research. And I think that it's important to not not just focus on the fact that it is being imposed, that we are being imposed to only feel attraction to one gender. I think it is also important to understand that this is a system that is um, imposing a coherence between assigned sex, gender, desire, and sexual practices. It's operating in the logic of the compulsory heterosexuality matrix, according to using a term from Butler, and producing a binary sexual classification by assuming everyone's desire is exclusively to one gender. So monosexism organizes this matrix by producing this binary sexual classification, and critically, this system only recognizes homosexuality as the exclusive opposite of heterosexuality. This doesn't challenge the binary, it reinforces it. This is another question I had when I was trying to argue in regards to monosexism. I was thinking, well, if we know that we're under this heteronormative system, how am I going to talk about another system that recognizes homosexuality, which is something that Santos and Craig explore in their text as well, being that a lot of gay and lesbian or monosexual people feel uncomfortable with the term monosexism because they are placed in the same, they believe that they're being placed on the same level as straight people, which I definitely disagree with. I don't think that gay and lesbian people are at the same level as straight people because straight people have heterosexual privilege. What I understand in monosexism is that, as I said, homosexuality is created as this exclusive opposite of heterosexuality, and then bi plus identities exist outside of that. And that's a bit of what Yoshino also says in his text of epistemic contract of bi-erasure. Then my thesis also focuses on epistemic injustice as resistance. I believe that monosexism has created an epistemic injustice for bi plus people. Epistemic injustice is a term created by Miranda Fricker in 2007. And basically, when I read the definition for this term and the two aspects that it presents as, I felt like it fit the bi experience completely. Basically, it is when there's testimonial injustice, when people are not believed as creators of knowledge, their experience is not taken into account, and hermeneutic injustice, where they don't have the hermeneutic tools, concepts to be able to explain their own experience. And I felt like this fit exactly within the bi experience as a product of monosexism, and I wanted to explore it through a more like, I needed to bring it down to something more practical, because again, this is a master's thesis. I'm not like doing a PhD. So I decided to apply this theoretical framework to identity and narratives, which I'm using theories from Stuart Hall, Butler, and Leonora Fuchs, talking about identity that is neither discovered or revealed, but rather constructed in a continuous open process conditioned by power relations, representation regimes, and specific cultural dynamics. So, as I imagine most of us here know, there are real life consequences to monosexism. I cite this paper from Taylor from et al. From Australia, where 1 in 4 bi plus people have attempted suicide. But then there's also very, very few research in regards to LGBT people in Peru. But there is these 2 studies from the same organization that has found the same pattern in regards to mental health in bi plus people from the international literature in Peru. So we have found high levels of anxiety and depression, and also sexualized comments from health professionals. I also think it's important to include that there, in the US specifically, there has been found that there's like higher rates of poverty or lower educational attainment or more sexual violence against bi plus people, which when I presented this information to my professors, it usually created a lot of confusion because there is this perception that bi plus people are more privileged than LGBT people. So there's a little bit of pushback, but I found it important to include just to give an overall idea of what's going on, even though we don't have the exact data in Peru. Again, my thesis focuses on analyzing identity trajectories, narratives, and socio-affective practices of bi plus women in Lima and how they reproduce and negotiate and challenge monosexism. I'm going to close because I'm already close to 10 minutes. My methodology is qualitative. I'm talking to bi plus women specifically in Lima, Gen Z millennial, and I'm also doing a queer ethnography and a final group meeting with my interviewees. My preliminary findings are that there's a late access to bi plus language. All of my interviewees accessed this information once they were in university. And I associate this directly with the hermeneutic injustice. A lot of them were already having, like attraction or even practices, but they didn't really have access to the information of just knowing the term bi or pan. I also found that there's like this subjective validation criteria. Many assumed bi plus identity only after a threshold experience, which I found very fascinating, and how it like varied according to person, whether it's attraction, whether it is their first practice, or whether it is full on like falling in love with someone of the same gender, usually always related to the same gender. Conditional social legibility, which is how I also view monosexism at play. In Peru, at least, and I believe in other places as well, there really isn't an exact social legibility in regards to bisexuality. Or like sexual orientation is usually read through someone's gender expression or partner's gender, and usually it falls within this binary of, okay, if she's a masculine woman, then she's a lesbian. If she's feminine, then she is straight. And lastly, I find incredibly important, as other people have said in their presentations, that community and access to resources has been incredibly healing and helpful for a lot of bi plus people. Hearing I'm bisexual is a performative resistance against epistemic injustice. And to close, I would just like to read this quote from one of my interviewees, because a key part of my research is valuing bi plus narratives as worthy of knowledge production, and I would like to honor that by reading some of these words. So this interviewee says that I believe it's super important to be visible as a bi-pan person for a simple reason. I wish I'd heard it years earlier. So yes, if there's a teenager who follows me on social media, I hope they come across the term sooner, because otherwise what they'll do is try to fill in with other labels what they can't yet explain, and that's dangerous. It's dangerous and it's sad. I'm 100% sure there's a lot of bisexual women today who identify as lesbians, not because they are, but because it's been the only label available to house their identity. And if there's a more accurate term that can name that experience better, I feel like it's my moral obligation to make it available. It's part of knowledge. I'm just gonna this is a bit of my bibliography, and that's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much for such a brilliant presentation. And I totally agree with you. I think it's really important to include your participants' words there and their narratives so that we can hear their voices coming through in your findings. Again, hopefully we will have time for some questions at the end, but please put some questions in the chat. And we will move on to our final presentation for this panel. The Places Where I Exist, Navigating the Marketplace with BIPLUS Community by Abigail. Abigail is an assistant professor of marketing in the College of Business Administration at California State University, San Marcos. Broadly, her research examines how diverse consumer groups and service providers experience and shape the marketplace. Her dissertation research explores the concept of safer market spaces from both the consumer and service provider perspectives. Previously, Abby received her PhD in marketing from the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. Prior to pursuing her PhD in marketing, Abby received her MA in Gender and Women's Studies from the University of Wisconsin-Madison and her BA in Anthropology from Western Michigan University. As a professor, Abby worked for several years in the nonprofit sector for communities and schools, first as a site coordinator and then as the director of volunteer and partner services. Over to you, Abigail.
Awesome. Thank you. I'm just going to take a minute to get my slides going.
Perfect.
Okay. All right. Are you able to see my slides? Okay, great. Thank you for having me. As mentioned, I'm Abby. I'm assistant professor of marketing. This is research based on my dissertation. Similar to Pamela, I entered my dissertation saying, I want to study bi erasure, and then I had to kind of educate everyone as to what that is. So this research started out in 2015. I'm currently working through the review process. And what I'm going to share with you today is just a snippet of my dissertation, what I thought maybe this group would be the most interested in. I'm not going to share any of the literature or theory with you, though I can if people have questions. I really wanted to get into the data and share some of that and what that looked like with you. So this is The Places Where I Exist, Navigating the Marketplace with BIPLUS Community. So just to get started, I wanted to share with you a little bit of my research path. As I mentioned, I started in 2015, and at that time, the US Supreme Court decision had just been upheld in the US. And so we saw a lot of companies coming out with these ads that were supposedly displaying LGBT representation. As a BIPLUS person myself, I didn't always feel represented in those ads. And so I was very curious as to how other people were perceiving those ads. And in those interviews, it led to an overall understanding that this sense of sometimes feeling invisible or not represented applied to physical market spaces as well. So spaces that sometimes were intentionally trying to signal inclusion to the LGBT community. And so this led to sort of shaping the research as, well, how are BIPLUS people approaching the marketplace if they a lot of times feel kind of uncertain to where they belong or where they're represented? So the research questions that I'm going to share with you today are, first, how are BIPLUS consumers approaching market spaces? And then what role does community or the collective play in sort of shaping these strategies for BIPLUS consumption? The methodology that I used for my dissertation was market-oriented ethnography. And so I'm going to walk through what that looked like. So first, as you can imagine, the sample was BIPLUS consumers. I didn't use labels to attract informants to the study. Instead, I used the language of attraction because, as we know, some people use no labels. There's a variety of labels that fall under the BIPLUS umbrella. And as we all know, this often intersects with trans, non-binary, and queer gender identities. So our sample did reflect that variance. As we know, we make up the largest portion of the community, yet still experience pervasive marginalization in mainstream market spaces, but also in market spaces intended specifically to serve our community. In terms of data collection, I took part in participant observation. I was a member of a BIPLUS social group for a little over 2 years. We had about 50 active members, and we would have monthly meetings, which would have on average about 10 to 12 people. In addition to those monthly meetings, we would have outings to different market spaces and special events Sometimes we'd go see new movies together, things like that. In addition to the field work that I did, all those field notes I collected in the group, I also conducted interviews with individual members from the group, including the two co-founders. I also sought BI+ consumers from outside the group, again, to build in some variance to the sample to understand how individuals were approaching the marketplace as well. And I interviewed folks about their experiences in a wide variety of market spaces, both positive experiences as well as negative experiences. So coffee shops, bars, hotels, gyms, their doctors, pretty much any kind of space that offers a service. And then based on the market spaces that individuals brought up in their interviews or spaces that became important to the group, I also did some additional digging. And so I would collect data about those individual market spaces. A separate part of my dissertation was I interviewed people who owned or ran those spaces as well to get the managerial perspective. But I would collect marketing materials, reviews online, website, snapshots, social media posts. I would go to those market spaces and take pictures and document my experience in those sites as well. So I'm going to get to my findings. Probably unsurprisingly to you, kind of the first major finding that came out is the systemic stigmatization that happens in a lot of really important sites in people's lives. So even if we don't even think about the market, BI+ people are coming to the market being shaped by experiences at home, at work, in their church, religious communities, as well as schools. So many times they experience exclusion in these sites or a sense of uncertainty or lack of social support. And so they're bringing all of that to the market with them. So this impacts their identity because we come to internalize that stigma, and it can lead to this hypervigilance where we're on guard and we're not really sure where this is going to pop up. We become sort of prepared for this mistreatment in spaces that we enter. This also leads BI+ consumers to seek out spaces where they feel like they can express those identities and it's safe and welcome to do so. So Grace, one of our informants, called this the places where I exist, which is what I use for part of the title of this presentation. So what was the BI+ social group all about? As I mentioned, we met monthly. There was an agenda for the meetings. Usually one of the co-founders would welcome everybody and then go through upcoming events in our city focused on the LGBTQ+ community that they thought members might be interested in. There was some planning, but the group mostly resisted planning efforts. And then there was time for board games, crafts, or just general chatting, and just a lot of social support and sharing how people express their BI+ identity. And this often led to spillover, so people going shopping together to help someone find clothing they felt more comfortable in to better express themselves. And then we also took part in special events. So outings together, we would meet up with other groups like the Ace Arrow social group, and then this really cool kind of landmark event called BI Takeovers that I'm going to talk a little bit more about that our group did throughout the 2 years I was a part of it. So the first thing that the group did for members was it helped set boundaries. So this is the welcome that would get shared online and at meetings. So the co-founders would welcome people and then clarify the intent of the events, making people aware of the unwanted sexual objectification that BI people face, and that they wanted these spaces and meetings to be safe and comfortable for everyone. They were meant to be platonic. So if there were unwelcome sexual advances, they would ask people to leave the group. If people were unkind in any way, they would also be asked to leave the group. And the co-founders did follow through on this in the future. They did have to ask some people to leave the group if they were making these kinds of remarks or advances towards people in the group. In terms of the BI takeover events, the purpose of these were to foster BI visibility in public market spaces. And the intent was, or it would be organized so it would take course over the course of a day in a range of different market spaces. Some of them involved alcohol, as this picture shows, but most of them didn't. And that was purposeful to give people time to be together where alcohol was not a part of the event. The BI flag was always prominently displayed, and it was always very lighthearted, which made it very unlikely that somebody would come up and make a problem for the group. So this is kind of an interesting marking territory, but also in a lighthearted, fun way. And sort of the purpose shared by one of the co-founders was to create a spot for bisexual people because we didn't feel welcome in the queer community or the straight community.
And then the last piece of data that I'd like to share with you is just an excerpt of my field notes from one of these bi takeover events. It took place at a drag show at the only local gay bar in town, where many group members had been mistreated previously, and the bi flag did not appear in the bar prominently. So once the group got to the bar, we kind of lingered around trying to kind of awkwardly figure out where we were going to sit. And one of the co-founders said, "Where can we sit where we can rub the flag in people's faces?" So he walked up to the group of tables right next to the stage for the drag show. And I, went to the bathroom. I came back and I see Xander unpinning the bi flag. And he says, "We should spread this across our table." And so we spread it across the table, and it was a makeshift tablecloth for the remainder of the event. So what's interesting about this is responding to stress or threat. We often hear about fight or flight, but this is a different strategy called flocking, where individuals make themselves more visible to others, sort of in the security of numbers. So my last slide, I know I'm between you and the break. What is the role of the group here? Well, first, and I didn't really get into this with the data, but it offers a collective knowledge and a history of market spaces. So similarly to what Reet Rabbit was saying, kind of this mapping of spaces that are safe and unsafe. And this was informal knowledge that was shared throughout the group and became codified over time. It offers socialization and what it means to be expressively and visibly bi, and helps other people learn from other members of the group about how to do that. It provides gentle support, so opportunities to be out, but without forcing or any kind of coercion. It offers that protection in numbers via flocking, and it increases this comfort among members, which I think is really important to consider, because often when we internalize this stigma or biphobia, it leads us to prioritize the comfort of others in market spaces and not the comfort of ourselves, because we are sometimes scared for our safety. And so this was one way that kind of softly scaffold that comfort among members so they could go out in public spaces and be visibly bi. All right, so that's just a little snapshot, but I appreciate your time, and I know we're out of time, but if people have questions, I'd love to hear from you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Abigail. And I know we do have the break scheduled now, but if people want to stick around and continue this conversation, we can run into the break a couple of minutes just to have this chat. I know there are some questions and some comments in the chat, and Robin recently pointed out if anyone wants to sign up for a digital subscription to Bi Women Quarterly. So it's great to see people sharing these resources and pointing out different ways that we can keep connected as a Bi Plus community. Does anyone have any specific questions for any of the wonderful presenters that we had in this panel on Bi Plus Lives? I know we touched on some different topics. We had intimate partner violence, we had mental health, we had experiences in different community spaces. Does anyone have questions for any of our speakers?
I do have one, if nobody else, just a quick one. Just always still for Abigail, like you talk about big consumer behavior, but it's like which is one of the limits of the research, because you've talked about staying in the group and observing and doing a lot of ethnography, which is something I really love. But I was wondering, like, did you talk about what their private spending habit or consuming? Like, we know people buy a lot of things online, maybe or how they navigate some kind of spaces. Have you ever had the feeling there was something they will not openly discuss about their consuming behavior, or something they will buy, not necessarily adult related, but like even things people will buy, but things other people will think it's cringe, like any time of personal consuming behavior and experiences?
Yeah, thank you for that question. It's always a challenge in marketing research because it's all self-report. So what people say they do is often different than what they do. Um, and sometimes it's not even through lying. It's just that we don't accurately remember our behavior sometimes. I think the biggest challenge for me is, so previously this research was looking at how people conceal or reveal their identity in public spaces. And the findings were structured around themes of strategies for concealing and strategies for revealing. And a concealing strategy is just fully withdrawing from the marketplace. So sometimes bi plus consumers would feel really uncertain or unsafe in spaces. And so they would outsource a lot of their shopping to online. And a lot of, especially with COVID and everything, a lot of stuff shifted online. Even before that, folks who maybe lived in homes where they lived with their parents or other family members they didn't feel comfortable being out to, their lives were, a lot of their lives were online. And I found it really hard to reach those people because they wouldn't always come to the meetings, or maybe they wouldn't come to the meetings at all. Or if I did sit down with an interview for them, it was like trying to get information out of them. And I don't want to make an informant uncomfortable. So that was one area of this consumer behavior that I found particularly challenging to understand, and that's a toll that it takes on people withdrawing from the marketplace. I mean, that gives you limited opportunities sometimes to build that community. So I think there are some implications of that, but that was hard to get at.
Thank you.
I would also invite the speakers to communicate with each other. I know Bi Plus Lives is quite a broad topic, and we're talking about different experiences or different parts of people's experiences. But do any of the speakers want to kind of engage with each other and make those connections?
We have a hand raised in the chat if we could flip over to Jace here.
I feel like I keep raising my hand and I keep talking from all of the participants. But Pamela, I just wanted to say that your presentation was absolutely excellent, and also that this is not easy work. As a very theoretically oriented person, also from the Global South, I know how difficult it can be to even find the information. Especially because Bi Plus is such a global North understanding of what it means to experience fluidity. Pero mi pregunta para ti, my question for you is, how has your background as someone from the Global South made it easier or harder to find the information you need?
Thank you so much for your comment and your question. Well, I think that my situation in particular is quite unique because, as I said, I'm Peruvian American, so I'm bisexual, bilingual, and binational. I love presenting myself that way. So it is difficult to access information that is regional, like from Latin America. But because English is technically my first language, I can very easily find a lot of resources in English. Most of the sources at the beginning of my research were in English, although I have seen a lot more academic texts coming from Argentina, from Mexico, from Spain. So that's very exciting. Also, studies that are coming from my own university or from my own city. I participated in an event for my master's program recently where there was another person presenting their master's thesis about sexism, biphobia, and sexual violence, which is very, very important to talk about. I definitely really enjoyed Chelsea's presentation about that. I think it's very important work that's being done. And yeah, I think that my ability to have such an understanding of the English language has really helped me with finding sources. And it's definitely one of my commitments to my bi activism in Peru to make that more accessible to people in Spanish. I have a blog on Instagram and TikTok where I do exactly that. I create content about bisexuality in Spanish because I was able to kind of understand myself better and feel more comfortable in myself as a bi person because of the information that I accessed in English. So yeah, I also completely forgot to mention, I also add a decolonial aspect to my explanation of monosexism because it's completely coherent with the colonial system because of the binary thinking. And I use Maria Lugones through the colonial gender system, and then also Homi Baba, who talks a bit about colonial nonsense and existing outside of that binary thinking. So yeah, it has been incredibly challenging, but I finally feel more comfortable because I feel like I have answers. And honestly, all of your comments have been highly encouraging because it is really solitary work. So to get this sort of feedback is very encouraging.
Thank you so much for your answer. And yes, absolutely excellent. And I think that it's Maria Lugones' work who wrote Why Bisexuality is Queer. If folks have not heard about this paper, I highly encourage you to read it. I am the only person that has ever cited it in my master's degree, and more people need to cite this paper because it is excellent and it speaks on the decolonial nature of bisexuality. Thank you again, Pamela. That was great.
Yeah, could you share that link in the chat, Jace, if you have a second, or anybody that has a second to share the link? I think it would be really great. Derek, I don't know if we can keep the chat after or get the resources out of the chat before we close the Zoom, but it would be really great if there's a way we can pull together all the wonderful resources that have been shared and the statistics that people. I saw that Dave put the statistic in the chat that somebody was asking about. So maybe there's a way we can pull together the resources that have been pulled today, so that people can reference these after the conference. I'm not the tech person. I'm handing over to Derek for that.
Yes, just a quick note on that. Worst case scenario, just email us after the conference and we'll have the Zoom chat available to you.
Okay, great. And I think, yeah, we can compile the resources and maybe send out the links after the conference, hopefully. Does anyone have any final questions, or perhaps we can take, oh, Dave, your hand, sorry.
Yeah, I just wanted to jump in here really quickly because I noticed there was a question that came up in the chat, and I usually don't look at the chat when I'm presenting because I just get distracted. But I didn't get I think I forgot to share my my references slide, and I know nobody can really read those in time anyway. I am going to try to put all of that into a Google Doc, which I'll have available tomorrow, and I'll be at a bunch of these a bunch of the presentations tomorrow. So if anybody would like to see my references, I've got, including some of the articles I mentioned, happy to share that. I'll have that information tomorrow.
I wanted to share real quick about Dave's presentation, if that's okay. I recently attended a public health conference about LGBTQ identities, and I found that the statistics around mental health were often presented as like sexual minority mental health was all lumped together, and then gender minority mental health was all lumped together. And I kind of pointed out to them that this is inherently biased because if you disaggregate that, you can see that the mental health statistics of the bisexual community are closer in number to that of the transgender community. And that gets erased when you present all sexual minorities together. And it makes it seem like homophobia is a problem affecting all sexual minorities, which it is, but it erases the monosexism piece of that. So I don't know if this is something that you've seen too. It seems like sometimes we do the research and we collect the numbers, but then the way that they're presented is often biased and distorts things and erases our experience.
You know, and it's kind of a double-edged sword in a sense. There's a bunch of statistics I ended up taking out of my presentation just for time, but one of them was that, and this has been mentioned by other people as well, that bisexual people are actually the majority within the overall LGBTQ community. And there's a Gallup poll that gets repeated every couple of years, and it consistently comes up with that. In the early years when they were doing that poll, I believe, and I may be getting this wrong, but they only at the time, they basically took the LGBTQ, the acronym letters, and they asked people to choose which of the 5 letters and the acronym they belong to. And I felt like that actually did a real disservice to trans people, because trans people can be gay, straight, or bi, or pan, or whatever, depending on their gender identity and who they're attracted to. So, you know, it goes both ways, but I do appreciate what you're saying there, Chelsie, that yeah, there are some statistical similarities and concerns, I guess, that are well worth bringing up.
Yeah, I totally agree with you both, and it's all about transparency, isn't it? And I think often if we use, and I've written about this in a paper I published in the Journal of Bisexuality, specifically about parenthood, but about how although the LGBTQ umbrella is useful for bringing us together as a broader community, if we use this acronym and don't disaggregate differences, we're invisibilizing how as bi plus people, our experiences are fundamentally different in some key ways to those of trans people and to those of gay and lesbian people. And so I think it's really important, especially when we're talking about things like mental health statistics, to disaggregate those groups and have those transparent statistics about mental health and also about intimate partner violence, Chelsea. We have just 2 minutes, so I might leave it here so that we can have a very short break before our next session. But thank you so much to all of our speakers. It's been a wonderful session and brilliant presentations from all of you on such important topics.